Take a breath. Get comfortable tonight. We're unlocking a forgotten drawer in history's quiet cabinet. You might not know what's inside, but I promise it hums with stories. Stories woven with gold thread, but stitched with anxiety. Stories that sparkle with diamonds in the torchlight, but weigh heavy on the bones beneath. So, before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 5 years old, maybe 6. Your hair has barely been combed properly, and you still speak in questions instead of answers. But already there are eyes on you. Tutors, nurses, stewards watching how you walk, how you sit, how you lift a goblet with 2 small hands. Because you're not just a child, you're a future queen, or at least someone hopes you will be. Your name has already been spoken in distant courts. Whispers over maps, wine, and dowry agreements. You don't know this yet, of course. You just know that you're not allowed to run in the hallway, and that crying must be done in private. From the moment you're born into royalty, your life is not yours. Your smile is practiced. Your silence is measured. And even the toys in your nursery are carefully chosen, none too silly nothing that encourages too much imagination. You learn to curtsy before you learn to read. They start you with posture. Your back is gently tapped if it leans. A book is placed on your head, not for fun, but as training. You're told queens don't slouch even when tired, especially when tired. You're also told to keep your eyes lowered unless directly addressed, but not too lowered, or you'll seem timid. Balance always, not just on the back of a horse or across a polished floor, but between expectations so precise they could be etched in glass. At the table, you're taught not just to eat, but how to be watched while eating. Small bites, napkin in lap, no grimacing at bitter herbs, and heaven forbid you ask for more stew before the Duke has finished his serving. Your language lessons begin early. Latin, French, sometimes Greek. But it's not about conversation. It's about diplomacy. You must learn how to write a formal greeting by age 8. You're taught how to address a pope, how to flatter an emperor, how to apologize for things that aren't your fault, because apologies are a queen's currency. And then come the gowns. Heavy silks, embroidered sleeves, stiff bodices. They scratch your skin, but you learn not to show it. You're told the cloth represents your status. That pain is part of the price. There's a story from a 14th century court where a young royal girl, just 7, was scolded for laughing too loudly during a feast. Her tutor said she needed to learn the weight of stillness. She didn't understand what that meant. She only knew that the room went cold when she laughed, and that her chair suddenly felt smaller. Sometimes, your brothers are allowed outside to ride to train with wooden swords to scrape their knees in the name of honor. You, meanwhile, are given a lute or an embroidery hoop. You sew saints' faces while your fingers bleed from the needle. If you're lucky, someone notices and gives you a thimble, but usually no one does, because queens don't bleed, not visibly anyway. Here's the historical fact of it. Royal girls were trained not as children, but as investments. Their upbringing was shaped by future alliances, their education by what a foreign court might expect, their diet adjusted according to fertility theories. Yes, even what you ate was curated for your womb's future potential. There's an odd little tidbit from a Hungarian court. In the 13th century, young princesses were fed specific herbs and fish believed to cool the temper and increase chastity. as if salmon could suppress desire. And then comes the marriage talk. By 10, you hear names. By 11, you know which kingdom is eyeing you. By 12, you might already be betrothed. You look at maps not with curiosity, but calculation. That's where my husband might live, you think, staring at a place whose language you don't speak. Sometimes you're told he's handsome, sometimes kind, but more often he's older, decades older, and he's important. That word important is repeated like a charm meant to soothe you. There's a famous letter from Eleanor of Aquitaine advising her granddaughter to never show sadness when hearing of her engagement. Smile, she writes, for a frown may delay your fortune. Whether Eleanor truly believed this or simply learned how the game was played, we'll never know. This leads to the academic question. Did these young royal women feel agency? Or were they trained so deeply in duty that they mistook it for choice? Some historians argue that many queens were politically shrewd, even at a young age. Others say that survival looked a lot like submission until you learned how to twist it into something more. But in those early years, the weight is real. You feel it in the stiffness of your shoes, in the silence you're praised for, in the way your dolls never get to grow up. You lie awake at night, sometimes wondering what your husband's voice will sound like, whether he'll speak kindly or just issue commands. You wonder what your children will call you and whether you'll get to choose their names. You're not scared, not exactly. You're just waiting. Like a book written in someone else's hand, left open on a table no one's reading yet. And somewhere in the corner of your room, the crown glints in the dark. Not on your head, but close enough that you can hear it breathing. You're barely tall enough to reach the windowsill, and already someone has drawn a border across your future with ink on parchment. You don't understand the language of treaties yet, but you know this. Your name isn't just yours anymore. It belongs to a kingdom, to a strategy, to a plan bigger than you are allowed to see. When you ask your governess if you'll get to choose your husband, she laughs not cruelly, just gently, like someone who remembers being that foolish once. She tells you that a queen marries where she's needed. You try to picture what that means. Later, you realize it means that your wedding will be less about you and more about distance geography and which river forms the natural border between two occasionally hostile nations. In the medieval world, marriage is diplomacy. And for royal daughters, love is neither the point nor the luxury. You are born into a political jigsaw puzzle, and your body is one of the pieces that moves. Your father's advisors sit around a long table. Maps rolled out tokens, pushed across regions. They speak of dowries, of alliances, of treaties to be secured with a bride. That bride is you. And so before you've even left the nursery, you've been promised. Sometimes it's to a boy you've never met. Sometimes it's to a man you never will, because he dies of fever before the wedding. In that case, your hand is simply redirected to his brother, or his cousin, or whoever still holds the necessary land and title. You don't wear an engagement ring. You don't get a romantic letter. Instead, you get a sealed scroll passed between envoys detailing exactly what you're worth in coincloth and cattle. There's a historical record from the early 1300s of a princess in Navarre who was betrothed at age 4 to a French heir. When the groom turned 15, he married someone else citing better strategic value. The original bride was quietly placed in a convent. She never saw France. These aren't rare stories. They're common. A royal bride was a peace treaty in silk slippers. Her arrival was meant to soothe a feud, or link two kingdoms, or prevent bloodshed between armies too tired to keep marching. Sometimes just her presence in a new land was enough to keep the sword sheathed, but peace came at a price. You pack your belongings into trunks you don't own, wave farewell to sisters you'll likely never see again, and ride toward a castle where every face is strange. If you're lucky, someone speaks your language. If not, you learn fast, or you stay silent. One odd fact: many royal women traveled to their weddings with an entirely new wardrobe paid for by both courts. But they often had to remove every item from their old country, including undergarments at the border in front of witnesses. Symbolic rebirth, they called it. You belong to your new people now. Even your underwear knows that. You step off the carriage to fanfare, and all eyes are on you. You are assessed immediately, not just your beauty, but your bearing. Are you regal? Are you fertile-looking? Have you been trained to curtsy correctly? The court watches as you meet your husband for the first time. Sometimes he's a boy, scared and stammering. Sometimes he's a man with 3 children and a war-hardened face. You're expected to smile either way. And then comes the wedding. The ceremony is grand, usually religious, and always political. Vows are exchanged. Gifts are presented, and all the while, you're thinking about what comes after. The night, the proof, the blood, and still, there's no real talk of love. You might come to love him. You might not. No one asks. Your mother once told you quietly that affection can be grown like herbs slowly, with light and patience. But she never promised it would happen. This raises an old debate. In historical circles, were these marriages merely tools of statecraft, or did royal women find genuine connection within them? Some scholars argue that over time, companionship developed. Others say the constant pressure to produce heirs left little room for romance. There's a letter from a queen consort of England written in careful Latin, where she describes her husband as dutiful in obligation, distant in spirit. That phrase, distant in spirit, echoes across centuries like a sigh. So you sit beside him at the feast, practicing how to hold a goblet while everyone watches. You nod when he speaks. You smile when he jokes. You are regal. You are polished. You are completely alone. And yet, in that loneliness, you begin to observe. You notice which nobles frown when your name is mentioned, which maids exchange glances behind the curtains. You realize that being a foreign bride is not just a role, it's a test. You're the outsider, meant to become the center. The girl meant to mother a dynasty. The chess piece, now standing on a square, painted by someone else's hand. And so, you adjust. You whisper to your ladies in the language you're still learning. You eat the food you don't yet enjoy. You watch. You endure. Because you're no longer a daughter of your kingdom. You're a clause in someone's treaty. The chest arrives before you do. It's large, lacquered, and carved with emblems from your house. A griffin, a vine, a sunburst shining faintly beneath a layer of beeswax polish. Servants carry it carefully as if it holds treasure. And in a way, it does, but not the kind you'd hope for. This is your bridal chest, your dowry box, your contribution to the marriage measured in bolts of fabric bundles of coin heirloom jewelry and expectations. You don't pack it yourself. You only watch. A necklace from your grandmother. A roll of wool dyed with the rarest of plants. a comb made of ivory, which you've only touched once. But what's folded between the garments hidden beneath the silk linings are the contracts. Not stories, not keepsakes. Documents. The legal foundation of your marriage is wrapped in ribbons. Your dowry isn't just a gift, it's collateral, a security deposit against your behavior, your fertility, your survival. Should things fall apart, if you are widowed, annulled, or accused, these papers may be the only leverage you have left. There's something odd about watching your future sealed up in a wooden box. The lid shuts with a soft thunk, and the clasp is locked. Not for protection, but for transport. You'll be escorted with it across borders, but make no mistake, it's not yours anymore. It's your husband's property the moment the vows are spoken. Medieval dowry law varied across regions, but the central idea remained: a noblewoman's value came with a price tag. Some brides brought cash, others brought land. Occasionally, entire towns changed hands under the guise of marriage settlements. A strange but true detail: there's a record from 12th century Sicily where a princess's dowry included a golden tooth, not hers. Just a singular object of mystery and monetary value. Historians still debate whether it was symbolic or merely eccentric, and yet there's more inside the chest than just riches. Sometimes the contracts hidden within speak more clearly than the bride ever could. These charters, usually in Latin, outline not only the financial terms, but behavioral clauses. What's expected of you? What counts as failure? In some cases, what you'll lose if you're accused of infidelity, even without proof. Some contain curious stipulations. A queen consort of Aragon was bound by contract not to remove her crown in public, even during childbirth. Another in Burgundy had to promise not to interfere with her husband's hunting routines. Apparently, falcons came before feelings. The presence of these clauses reveals a tension that runs through every stitch of your wedding garment's. Trust is rarely assumed. There's a debate among scholars: were these contracts empowering, offering women legal recourse, or purely mechanisms of control? One view says the dowry preserved a woman's right to property in a patriarchal system. Another argues it transformed her into a walking ledger, her body just a line item in estate planning. But you don't have time for theory. You're riding toward your new life with a chest that holds not just your belongings, but your obligations. When you arrive at your husband's court, the chest is opened before witnesses. The coins are counted, the fabrics inspected, the jewels examined for authenticity. There is a notary with ink-stained fingers nodding solemnly as each item is confirmed. And then finally you. Not weighed, not counted, just watched. You're part of the deal, but not part of the discussion. Some queens over time learned how to use the dowry chest as leverage. They protected what was technically theirs, requesting it be held in trust or assigned back to them in widowhood. Others lost everything in moments of scandal or misfortune. The chest was reclaimed or emptied or simply forgotten, and still its presence looms in every room you enter. Everyone knows what you brought with you. Everyone knows your price. You run your fingers over the edge of the lid sometimes late at night, wondering if anyone will ever see what was not written in the contracts: your thoughts, your hopes, your softness. Because inside that chest, somewhere beneath the gilded slippers and embroidered veils, is the quiet knowledge that this union is built not on affection, but on arithmetic. It's a hard thing to carry, even in a beautiful box. The wedding is over. The feast has ended. The trumpets are quiet, and the guests have gone home. But for you, the true ceremony is only just beginning. Because now all eyes turn to your stomach, not in admiration, though they may still compliment your figure, not in hunger, though you'll be told what to eat and when, but in calculation, projection, hope. You are a royal bride, and you are expected to become a royal mother. And so begins the waiting game. In some ways, it starts subtly. The servants whisper about whether your complexion has changed. The court physician glances a little longer when you rise from kneeling. The queen mother gifts you a fertility charm, its meaning unspoken. But it doesn't stay subtle for long. In the medieval world, a queen's womb wasn't just private, it was public property. Her ability to conceive, to carry to birth, was wrapped into the very fabric of political survival. If she produced sons, the line continued. If she did not, chaos lurked. Dynastic crises weren't always caused by war. They were often caused by empty cradles, and you lying under canopies of embroidered vines are expected to bloom. The pressure is constant but quiet. You are not scolded. You are watched. Every time you decline wine, there's a murmur. Every time you look tired, there's speculation. A missed period might cause celebration or panic. A single miscarriage can shake a throne. One historical fact: Queen Anne of Bohemia was married to Richard II of England for 12 years. She bore no children. Though historians now suspect health issues, whispers of divine punishment or secret sin followed her for generations. You see, a queen's failure to conceive wasn't seen as nature's accident. It was often interpreted as fault, sinful behavior, a cursed union, divine disapproval. And sometimes, suspicion turned into strategy. If you didn't get pregnant soon enough, your husband's advisors might suggest alternative remedies. Some recommended special prayers. Others turned to medicine, if you can call it that. A peculiar detail from 14th century France. One royal physician recommended boiling hare's lungs in wine and having the queen bathe in the steam. Another suggested she sleep with a piece of parchment inscribed with psalm verses beneath her pillow. Yes, really, you begin to notice that everyone has advice. The kitchen maid whispers about herbs. The bishop offers a sermon on patience and purity. Even the falconer casually mentions that spring is the best time to conceive. But you're not just waiting to be pregnant. You're waiting to be safe. Because until you produce an heir, ideally a son, your position is never secure. This leads to a debate still explored in historical circles. Was a queen ever truly in power before bearing a child? Some scholars argue yes, pointing to clever political maneuvers and courtly influence. Others say no. Without a child, her crown was a borrowed one. You begin to feel your body as something separate from you. It is watched, spoken about, speculated on. You wonder if you're glowing, or just flushed from anxiety. There are days when you fake smiles through nausea. There are nights when you touch your belly in the dark, wondering if anything is changing. And when you finally miss a cycle, the whole court seems to lean forward. You try to hide it, but your ladies-in-waiting have been trained for this moment. The midwife is summoned. The bedding is changed. The astrologer is consulted. You are no longer a bride. You are a vessel. And once the pregnancy is confirmed, the waiting continues, but heavier now. There are rituals, restrictions. You're told not to eat eels. You're forbidden from walking on uneven paths. Loud noises are discouraged. You're handed talismans to wear around your neck, herbs to hang near the door, prayers to be whispered at night. But even with all the care, childbirth remains a dangerous crossing. You've heard the stories. some whispered, some carved into stone. Queens who bled too long. Queens who died before naming their child. Queens buried with their infants cradled beside them. Still, you hope. You hope for a safe delivery, for a strong son, for the relief that might finally allow you to rest without listening for footsteps outside your door. Because this isn't just biology, it's destiny. And in the morning light, as you sit on a velvet cushioned bench, sipping broth and pretending not to feel sick, you wonder how many queens before you sat exactly like this, staring out at a garden they weren't allowed to walk in, wondering whether the life inside them would finally make them matter. The crown is heavier than it looks. Everyone says that. What they don't say is that it's also hollow. Not just on the inside where it rests against your head, but in what it promises. Because while the crown glitters under torchlight and seems to command every beau in the room, it does not shield you from silence, or from scrutiny, or from the knowledge that your voice, though it echoes, is not always heard. You are queen, yes. But what does that mean exactly? You sit at the king's right hand. You wear robes embroidered with lions' crosses or fleur-de-lis. You sign decrees sometimes. You sponsor a chapel. You smile at ceremonies, but you do not rule. Not directly. Not unless something has gone very wrong, or very, very right. And even then, your power is often borrowed, or conditional, or temporary. There's a truth that lingers in every medieval court. Royal women are visible symbols, not sovereign forces. Your image is painted in frescoes, woven into tapestries, etched into coins. But behind closed doors, decisions are made in your absence, or worse, in your name. The throne beside the king looks impressive, but it's mostly ornamental. You start to notice things. A nobleman interrupts you mid-sentence, and no one scolds him. A letter you wrote is edited before it leaves the chamber. A suggestion you offer in council is accepted only after your husband repeats it. You're not imagining it. There's a documented instance from a 15th century German court where a queen proposed a charitable endowment for widows. The king's advisors dismissed it as too generous. Days later, the king announced the same idea, and it passed with applause. Her name was quietly omitted from the final charter. So, you learn to move carefully. You speak in ways that sound like compliments, but carry instruction. You host dinners and arrange seating to provoke just the right conversation. You plant ideas in trusted ears and let them bloom elsewhere. It's not rule, it's influence, and it's delicate. Here's a peculiar detail. Some queens had curtain hours, a designated time of day, when they would receive visitors behind a literal curtain. Symbolically, it represented mystery, wisdom, and privacy. In practice, it allowed them to gather information, to listen, to wield soft power. One curtain, that was all. But it changed the temperature of a room. There's a scholarly debate about the true nature of queenly power. Were royal women passive figureheads or silent strategists? Some point to queens who commissioned monasteries, raised armies, even governed regencies. Others argue that for most power was more theatrical than tangible, that the crown offered visibility, not agency. But you live inside that contradiction. You hold the royal scepter with a steady hand, but you know it's not a sword. You wear velvet-lined slippers, but walk paths chosen by others. You sit at banquets beside lords who smile too politely, who remember your womb before they remember your words, and yet you're not without strength. You learn who listens. You learn which advisor fears your gaze, which noblewoman carries news between rooms. You keep mental notes like armor, and sometimes, when the king leaves court, or falls ill, or loses interest, you step in. You speak more firmly. You issue a decision. You remind the court that the queen's seal is still recognized by the chancery. They don't always argue. Sometimes they bow. And for a moment, the hollow crown feels full. There's a kind of quiet brilliance in the way queens navigated power. Not with proclamations, but with presence. Not through declarations, but through design of rooms, of conversations, of relationships that would outlast any single reign. Late at night, you return to your chamber. You remove the circlet, your scalp sore from the weight. You peel back the curtain, lie down, and stare at the canopy above, embroidered with stars you never chose, sewn by hands you've never met. And still, you sleep beneath them, because they say they belong to you. But you know better. The real power lies not in the stars stitched above your head, but in the thoughts you don't speak, the ones you carry like coins in the hem of your gown. They surround you always, not as guards, not as servants, though technically they are both, but as mirrors, gentle, moving, well-dressed reflections of the queen. Your ladies in waiting. You don't choose them, not always. Some arrive with recommendations from noble houses. Others are appointed by your mother-in-law, or your husband, or the church. A few, if you're lucky, are true friends, or at least skilled pretenders. They dress you, brush your hair, kneel beside you when you pray. They know which ring you wear when you're worried, and which embroidery you pick when you need quiet. They learn your rhythms like lullabies, but what they really do is listen. And what you come to realize is this listening is more powerful than speaking. In the court, power moves not in shouts, but in murmurs. You're watched, but so are they. And while you're confined to rituals, your ladies move freely, carrying folded linens and fuller gossip from one chamber to another. They become your ears, and sometimes your voice. One whispers that Lord Willem has been meeting with a foreign envoy in secret. Another tells you that the Duke's son has been asking too many questions about your dowry. These are not confessions, they're currency. You tuck them away. You nod. You wait. Historically, ladies in waiting were more than companions. They were information conduits. In some courts, they were even trained to memorize entire conversations and repeat them verbatim. A kind of royal surveillance dressed in velvet. There's a record from the Burgundian court where a lady in waiting overheard a noblewoman mocking the queen's childlessness. The next day, the noblewoman's invitation to court was mysteriously rescinded. No one asked why. This raises an academic question. Were ladies-in-waiting tools of the queen or spies planted to control her? Historians disagree. Some argue they gave royal women private power. Others believe they were more often used to monitor and report. The truth likely lies in between, because some ladies are loyal. Some are loyal to someone else, and a few are loyal only to opportunity. One curious detail in the Spanish court of the 15th century, a queen's closest lady-in-waiting was required to sleep in the same room as her mistress every night, officially for protection, unofficially to ensure nothing unexpected occurred. Even your dreams aren't private, but there's comfort in companionship too. When the world feels cold and ceremonial, A whispered joke while dressing can feel like sunlight. A hand brushing yours as a silent gesture of reassurance. A glance that tells you someone knows what you're enduring and isn't judging. You share secrets with some, but not all. You learn who can be trusted with your tears and who reports them. And then there are the moments when you use the system to your advantage. You send one lady to deliver a message, another to stall a conversation, a third to simply sit beside a visiting countess and hum a little too loudly, all while you wait for what you need to unfold. It's a choreography, and you are the unseen conductor. They tell stories of queens who fell because of the women around them, but they rarely tell the stories of queens who rose because of them, of the ladies who carried letters in their sleeves, or deflected suspicion, or held firm in rooms filled with men who doubted you. One of your ladies grew up with you. She knows your laugh before it was practiced. Another was sent to you just last winter. Her smile is too smooth, her eyes a little too calculating. But still, you keep her close. Sometimes enemies make the best mirrors. At times you wish you could walk among them as one of them, without titles, without robes, just another woman in the chamber, speaking freely, laughing loudly. But you can't. So instead, you use the veil of rank to your advantage. You drop a line at supper, knowing it will be repeated. You sigh by a window, knowing someone listens. You mention a name with careful neutrality, just to see which lady stirs. And later, when you receive the exact response you predicted, you smile to yourself, because you may not hold court with sword or seal, but with silks with silence, and with a few strategically placed listeners, you wield a power far more enduring. And as your ladies bow before leaving the chamber skirts, whispering across the stone, you understand something the crown never taught you. You don't need to speak to be heard. The gown is breathtaking. It shimmers under the chapel lanterns, every thread kissed with gold, every pearl hand-stitched into velvet the color of dusk. It is heavier than any garment you've worn, but that's expected. It's a coronation gown. It's supposed to feel like history. What no one tells you is that it's also sewn with quiet panic. You stand still as your ladies tug the bodice tighter. Not too tight, there must be breath for prayer, but snug enough to impress the nobility watching from the balconies above. They say the dress was blessed by monks. You wonder if they bless the pins stuck in your sleeves too. Outside, the bells are ringing. The streets below are thick with people straining to glimpse your silhouette as you ascend the throne. They cheer. Some wave kerchiefs. A few throw flowers. You smile, of course, because you must. But inside, a quiet truth itches at your skin. You are being crowned today, not only for who you are, but for what you're expected to become. A royal wife, a fertile mother, a silent partner, a visible symbol. This is not the moment of triumph, it seems. It's a beginning, but not necessarily one of freedom. There's a documented coronation from 14th century England, where the queen stood for over 4 hours in a ceremonial robe so hot and stiff that she fainted halfway through the anointing. They paused, fanned her gently sprinkled rose water, and continued as if nothing had happened. The record notes, minor delay, no scandal. They never mention how she felt. Your gown today, too, is lined with secrets. Hidden beneath the embroidery is a strip of cloth with your family's crest sewn near your heart, a reminder of whose daughter you are. At the hem, your ladies have tucked in dried rosemary for remembrance. You suspect it's also for courage, and in the lining stitched by your most trusted maid is a single phrase in thread. You are more than what they see. You feel it against your skin. And for a moment, you breathe easier. The coronation rite begins. You kneel. You rise. You are anointed with holy oil that smells of myrrh and something older, something cold. The crown is placed on your head, and you feel the weight of its metal settle deep into your spine. People cheer again. You smile again. Your fingers ache from gripping the orb. Your feet throb in shoes designed more for symbolism than walking. But no one notices. No one is meant to. This moment will be painted, commemorated, retold for decades. But no one will speak of the fear clenching behind your ribs, or the way you bit your lip until it bled when the bishop invoked obedience. Historians still debate what power queens actually held during and after coronation. Was it merely ceremonial? Or did it grant legitimacy, sacred authority, even the rare right to intercede? Some scholars say it was symbolic theater. Others argue it offered a sliver of genuine sovereignty. But for you standing there beneath a carved archway, in front of nobles who know your womb, matters more than your words. The answer doesn't feel scholarly. It feels personal. You are now officially queen, but nothing about you has changed. Still, they look at you differently now, as if the oil has hardened you, as if the chanting has transformed you. You're no longer a woman. You're a role. And roles don't get tired. They don't worry. They don't cry. But real women do. One peculiar coronation tradition from Hungary involved the queen receiving a ceremonial scepter engraved with lilies to remind her of her purity. It was placed in her hand by a bishop who did not ask if she had ever been afraid. You smile as the court bows. The throne feels cold. Your arms tremble under the weight of authority no one quite intends to let you use. And later, when you return to your chamber and the gown is slowly peeled away, layer after layer of silk and sanctity, you see it. The sweat marks under your arms, the red imprint of jewels on your collarbone, and the small spot where your tears stained the embroidery. You laugh softly. It's absurd, and you know it. Because no one ever talks about how much a coronation can hurt. But tomorrow they'll say you were radiant, composed, blessed by heaven. And perhaps in a way you were. But you were also something else. Human. You draw the curtain closed, thinking it will give you privacy. It won't. The marriage bed is soft. Almost too soft, piled with linen and fur and expectation. The candlelight flickers, casting long shadows on the stone walls. Somewhere down the hall, a servant sneezes, and it echoes as if the castle itself were listening, because it is. Tonight is not just about you and your husband. It's about duty, proof, politics, and it is quite literally being watched, not by a crowd, though some queens have known that horror, but by a quiet system of oversight so well trained it doesn't need to announce itself. It simply exists. Someone will know if the bed was shared. Someone will record whether the sheets bear witness. Someone, perhaps, standing just outside the chamber door, is waiting for a signal. Your marriage bed comes with a spy, maybe two. There's a tradition, particularly common in France and Italy, where a noble woman's wedding night required subtle confirmation. Sometimes a trusted maid slept in the adjoining chamber. Sometimes the bride's undergarments were quietly collected at dawn. The reason? Not scandal. Not perversion. just bureaucracy. A consummated marriage is a binding one, a powerful one, an alliance legally sealed. And where there is power, there must be record. You lie awake beside your new husband, barely breathing, unsure whether to whisper or remain silent. He is quiet too, maybe from nerves, maybe from disinterest, maybe from knowing that whatever happens tonight, someone will report it. In a few cases, royal couples stage the entire evening. They lay fully clothed in bed, while trusted witnesses peeked through the curtain, confirmed proximity, and retreated. One historian notes an Iberian queen who referred to this custom as a performance in candlelight, but not all queens had such arrangements. Some had to face the full weight of the ritual. A strange detail, in certain courts, a wet nurse would be selected before the wedding in hopeful preparation for pregnancy. This woman would sometimes be present near the chamber, not to observe, but to anticipate. Imagine that. Being watched, not for what you do, but for what you might produce. There's a documented case in medieval Bohemia where a queen too shy to speak had her maid slip a ribbon under the chamber door the morning after, stained with a drop of blood, meant to assure the court the union was valid. The ribbon is said to have been framed. You wonder, as you lie there, if your own pillowcase will someday be archived. This leads to an uncomfortable academic debate. Was the surveillance of royal consummation about truth or control? Some scholars suggest it was a way of protecting the queen, ensuring no one could later claim the marriage wasn't real. Others argue it reduced women to a set of biological milestones, married, consummated, pregnant. But in this moment, you're not thinking like a scholar. You're thinking about the noise the bed makes, about the footfall in the hallway, about whether someone heard you speak, whether the silence will be interpreted correctly, because silence is a language at court. So is stillness. So is the rustle of linen at dawn. You wonder what the spy will say. She looked composed. He stayed the night. No sounds were heard. You wonder which of these phrases will end up in a clerk's book. And when morning comes, and the sun pours through the thin glass window, you rise before anyone knocks. You fold the blanket carefully. You set the chamber pot slightly ajar, just enough to suggest intimacy without making a statement. It's all part of the game, because whether or not anyone was watching directly, they will piece it together. From your blush, from his smile, from the angle of your slippers beneath the bed. And when the maid finally enters, she glances once, just once, at the sheets. Her expression is neutral. Her hands are fast. She says nothing, but the message is clear. She'll report what she saw, or what she thinks she saw, or what she's been told to say. And your marriage now is as real as the version the court chooses to believe. Later that day, as you sit beside your husband at the high table, someone lifts a goblet and toasts your union. Cheers ripple through the hall. You smile politely, eyes fixed on the table. No one mentions what happened in the chamber. They don't need to, because the spy already did. You sit very still. The chair is cushioned, but your back aches. You're not sure if it's from the weight of your gown or the child curling inside your womb. Either way, you do not complain. A queen doesn't shift in discomfort. A queen doesn't wince. A queen certainly doesn't cry. Not in public anyway. You're pregnant. And now everything is measured by that fact. Your walk is observed. Your appetite is discussed. Your cravings are tracked like omens. Last week, you asked for figs, and a whisper started that it must be a boy. This morning, you gagged at the smell of onions, and now half the castle is wagering it's a girl. You used to be greeted with a bow. Now people greet your belly. Your ladies touch it lightly when they pass. Noblemen ask about your health in coded ways. What they really mean is how's the heir coming along. In some sense, this is the most powerful you've ever been. You carry a kingdom inside you. You could at this very moment be shaping the future king or the next queen. But that second possibility is met with softer applause because everyone's counting on a son. One historical truth in medieval courts: a queen's first and foremost duty was to bear a male heir. The production of sons was not just desirable, it was required. A failure to do so could undermine alliances, shake dynasties, even lead to annulment. You know the names of the queens who failed. You also know what happened to them, and so you study the signs. You pray. You eat what the herbalist recommends: almonds steeped in milkfish, soaked in vinegar. You avoid strong cheese and loud music. You keep lavender under your pillow and rub your wrists with rosemary. You smile even when you feel hollowed, but pregnancy isn't a soft, glowing season. Not for you. It's a full-time performance of grace under pressure. The morning sickness lingers far past morning. Your feet swell. You feel dizzy in the chapel and nearly faint during vespers, but you do not speak of it. Instead, you tighten your fingers around the carved armrest of your throne and pretend you're made of oak. There's a strange little detail from a 13th century court. A queen was made to sleep with a carved wooden figurine of St. John beneath her pillow to ensure the child would be holy and male. The figure was polished smooth over time by centuries of women hoping for the same. You wonder how many dreams were soaked into that wood. As the months pass, the anxiety grows louder than your heartbeat. You begin to calculate: if it's a son, you'll be honored, celebrated, perhaps even loved. If it's a daughter, you'll be consoled. Politely, the tension grows, and with it, a quieter fear. What if you don't survive? Childbirth is not a gentle thing in this world. No matter how many prayers are offered or pillows arranged, the outcome is never guaranteed. Queens have died in labor just like peasant women, maybe more often for all their finery. There's a letter written by a midwife to a French queen in the 1400s that simply ends with, "I will bring scissors for the child," and a priest just in case. Just in case. You hear stories of labors that last 3 days, of breech births, of midwives sobbing into aprons, of royal coffins carved before the baby's first breath. And yet no one asks how you feel. They ask if you've chosen a name, if you've selected a wet nurse, if you'd like a cradle carved with stars or vines. You smile again. You're getting very good at that. You begin to wonder what happens to queens who break not their bodies, but their hearts. The ones who weep after the birth or during. The ones who look at their newborn and feel nothing but numbness. Do they whisper these things to their ladies? Do they confess in the dark, hoping the candle doesn't flicker too loudly? There's a debate among historians. Were medieval queens emotionally distant out of necessity, or were their feelings simply undocumented? We see them mostly through letters, records, paintings, but not diaries, not dreams. The softness is missing, or perhaps it was always hidden. Still you carry on. When the labor begins, you don't scream, at least not at first. The priest is outside the chamber. The physician waits with steady hands and cold tools. The room fills with steam and sage. And when it's over, when the cry echoes and you feel your soul return to your body, you wait. Is it a boy? They nod. They cheer. Someone runs down the hall. You can already hear bells ringing in the village. You close your eyes, not from relief, but from exhaustion. You did it. You gave them what they wanted. And now, for a few brief moments, you belong to yourself again. The bells toll low and slow, not for a birth this time, but a death. He is gone. Your husband, your king, is laid out in the chapel under embroidered cloth and candles that seem to burn slower than usual. People file in with soft sighs and respectful nods. The nobles wear black, the clergy chant psalms, and your son, your living heir, sits beside you, fidgeting slightly, already being taught how stillness means strength. But you are the widow now. The black veil you wear isn't just mourning cloth, it's a signal, a transformation. In many ways, this is the moment your life begins to belong to you. It's strange, isn't it? That loss can feel a little like liberty. No one says that aloud, of course. You must weep, but not too much. You must retreat, but not vanish. You must speak of duty, honor, and sorrow, but never relief. But inside, you feel something else, something dangerous, something alive. Choice. Historically widowed queens occupied a peculiar space in medieval courts. They were no longer bound to their husband's will, but they weren't quite independent either. Many were sent to dower lands, estates gifted to them as part of their marriage contracts meant to sustain them in widowhood. And some queens ruled those lands with startling competence. In England, France, Castile, widowed queens became landlords, legal authorities, even local military figures. They managed taxes, distributed food, built chapels, funded schools. Not always grand gestures, but often effective ones. One recorded case from the 14th century tells of a dowager queen who negotiated trade tariffs more skillfully than her late husband had. Another oversaw the rebuilding of 3 bridges and a monastery in her territory because she claimed the living must be tended as the dead are prayed for. There's a quiet power in that, but freedom as ever comes with conditions. You are expected to remain dignified, modest, chaste, preferably celibate. The church encouraged royal widows to retire into religious life, or at least behave as if they had. Many did, but not all. Some fell in love. Some fell into scandal. Some remarried, though rarely for themselves. A second marriage was often about securing further alliances, not pleasure. And it always came with a cost. There's a peculiar story of a Bohemian queen who, after her husband's death, fell in love with a court poet. The affair was discovered, the poet disappeared, and she was quietly sent to a far-off convent, her lands redistributed, her letters seized. That's the risk of desire, even in widowhood. But you are careful. You write letters in your own hand now. You consult with advisors who once only glanced your way. You walk the gardens without asking permission. You choose what to wear, when to speak, which books to read. And you begin to be remembered for more than your womb. One of your ladies once said, "The crown fits differently on a widow." At the time, you didn't understand. Now you do. Because when you were queen consort, your presence was ornamental, measured by lineage, fertility, silence. Now as queen dowager, you are seen through a different lens, wisdom age, stability, and wealth. Yes, You finally hold your own accounts, your own stewards. You send alms to monasteries you've chosen, not ones assigned by your late husband's advisors. You commission a tapestry for your private chapel depicting a woman standing alone beneath an arch of oak trees. The scholars debate whether royal widows were truly free. Some argue that they were still bound by their sons, their courts, their reputations. Others insist this was the one stage of life where a woman could truly steer her own story. You know this. You are no longer a pawn on someone else's board. You are no longer walking 2 steps behind a man crowned before you ever had a choice. Now, they come to you. They ask for your blessing on marriages, your signature on grants, your presence at coronations. You are not expected to be youthful, nor flirtatious, nor obedient. You are expected to endure. And you do. But every so often, you walk the corridors alone, your slippers soft on the stone, and remember the girl who once asked if she would choose her own future. Now at last, she does. You sneeze once at supper, and someone whispers that you might be pregnant again. You skip the roast fowl, and the lady to your left raises an eyebrow. You sit out a dance at the winter feast, and by morning the entire castle is humming with theories. It's exhausting, truly, because when you're a queen, your fertility isn't just your business, it's everyone's. Your body becomes a kingdom-wide riddle solved with gossip and speculation, even after you've had children, especially after you never really escape it. Every cycle, every fainting spell, every tight corset becomes potential news, and you begin to realize that your womb is no longer a part of you. It's a narrative device, a political tool. One false rumor can stir unrest. One whispered pregnancy can sway the mood of an entire court. There's a recorded case in 15th century Castile where a queen's sudden illness sparked rumors of pregnancy, despite her husband being away on campaign for months. The resulting panic didn't focus on her health, but on whose child it could possibly be. The queen recovered. The rumors did not. In your own court, you learn to read the signs when the courtiers look at your waistline instead of your face, when the royal physician happens to drop by twice in a week, when your ladies begin choosing gowns with looser seams. You haven't said a word, but the conversation has already started without you. Sometimes rumors are planted deliberately. If the kingdom needs hope, a rumor of pregnancy boosts morale. If the court is restless, whispers of an heir calm the air like soft rain on dry leaves. And if political rivals are circling a well-placed "she is with child" can buy time, real or not. A curious historical tidbit: in late medieval France, one queen was rumored to be with child 7 different times. Only twice was it true. But each rumor held its own strategic value. Your body becomes more powerful as a symbol than it ever was as a self. And when you're not pregnant, that too becomes dangerous. The absence of children is rarely seen as chance. It's suspicion. It's prophecy. It's your fault, even if the king avoids your bed. Even if illness has left you fragile. Even if you've wept quietly through each lost pregnancy. None of that is written in the court ledgers. What's recorded is absence, and absence echoes louder than truth. There's an academic debate. Did fertility rumors protect queens by preserving their value, or endanger them by turning their biology into spectacle? Some argue it allowed women to extend their influence. Others see it as surveillance, masked as concern. You feel both. 1 week, you are seen as the hope of the realm. your future swelling quietly beneath your gown. The next you're met with sympathetic nods and soft-spoken prayers, though you haven't said a word. It's a strange thing to have your future dictated by the shape of your shadow. Even your letters become coded. You write vaguely to your mother about feeling lightheaded, knowing full well the messenger will pause to read between the lines. You accept gifts of herbs and sweets for health with a practiced smile. You become fluent in ambiguity. And sometimes you lean into it. You drop your goblet at a feast. You rest a hand on your belly during a procession. You decline a wine cup with a glance. All calculated, all meaningful. Because if the court will speak, you may as well choose the tune. And yet beneath it all, there's a quiet ache. Not for power, not for legacy, but for truth. To be able to say, I am tired. I am grieving. I am not with child. And to be heard without consequence. But this is not that world. So you smile. You nod. You let the rumors swirl. Because in a court where silence is suspect, sometimes the wisest move is letting them wonder. Even if your body is no longer yours, your silence still is. The kitchen smells like rosemary and suspicion. Steam rises from bronze pots, carrying hints of garlic sweetroot, and the subtle fear that someone somewhere may have added just one wrong pinch of something bitter. You can smell the roast, but you can also smell the tension. Because here in the royal kitchens, nothing is just food. Everything you eat must be tasted. Everything poured must be watched. Being queen means being hungry in public, but only carefully. You sit at the high table with dozens of eyes on your plate. Your goblet gleams in the firelight. Servants pass you dishes with silver tongs. You don't eat first. That's for the taster. Yes, there's a taster. Usually a servant, or sometimes even a knight of low rank, chosen not for bravery, but for expendability. He tastes your meat, your stew, your wine, even your candied quince. Then he waits. Just long enough to make sure he doesn't fall over foaming. It's strange, isn't it? That the simple act of eating something so basic, so human, becomes a matter of strategy. One bite, and you could be remembered forever. Not for your wisdom, not for your diplomacy, but for your death at the hands of someone with access to your kitchen. Poison was the great equalizer of medieval courts. It needed no sword, no army, no battlefield, just a clever hand and a quiet moment. And queens, well, queens, were tempting targets, not always for hate, sometimes for inheritance, sometimes for love turned sour, sometimes just for ambition stirred slowly into a honeyed sauce. History tells us of queens who feared their meals so much they only ate food they prepared themselves. Others fasted often not for piety, but for self-preservation. There's a curious case from 15th century Naples. Queen Joanna II insisted her meals be served only by women who had tasted the same dishes themselves. They sat nearby, chewing slowly, eyes on her fork. No one was allowed to speak until she'd swallowed. No one dared cough. You begin to notice little things. A cook's apprentice replaced. A different servant bringing your tray. A change in the smell of the boiled wine. Is it cinnamon or something else? You learn to hide your hesitation. You learn not to ask questions too directly. If you suspect, you smile wider. You take a smaller bite. You leave the crusts and compliment the glaze. And yet you must eat. A queen cannot faint at court. A queen cannot grow pale with hunger. She must look healthy, radiant, abundant, especially if she's expected to bear heirs. The contradiction becomes familiar. You must nourish yourself without trusting the nourishment. And so, you develop rituals. You eat only from specific plates. You drink only from a certain goblet, one gifted by your mother, believed to change color if poison is near. You speak softly with the head cook, reminding him how dearly your family values loyalty. You keep a pouch of dried herbs sewn into your sleeve, a blend said to neutralize toxins, though no one can remember who first said it. Even your dog becomes part of the defense. One queen, Margaret of Anjou, was said to feed scraps to her spaniel before touching them herself. The dog lived a long life. Margaret lived longer. Coincidence or strategy, scholars still debate. And it wasn't always foreign enemies who posed the threat. Sometimes it was courtiers, clergy, even members of your own family. Especially if you were blocking someone's ambition, or holding too much influence, or bearing children someone else wanted erased. The danger rarely shouted. It whispered. This leads to a scholarly question that still puzzles medievalists. Was poison truly as common as the fear surrounding it suggests? Or did the fear itself serve as a form of control? Some argue that the myth of poisoning kept women in a state of permanent caution. Others believe the threat was very real. Too many sudden deaths, too many mysterious fevers, too many conveniently timed illnesses. One account from the French court details a noblewoman who died 2 days after a banquet, her lips turning blue, her breath sour with almonds. The kitchen was searched. The head chef vanished. Nothing was ever proven. But the queen, who hosted the feast, never touched baked almonds again. And you, in your own hall, begin to develop a tongue for caution. You detect bitterness beneath sweetness. You prefer plain broth over spiced stew. You avoid dishes you didn't see prepared. The food no longer brings comfort. It brings calculation. Even the priest who blesses your table cannot ease your mind. He says grace, but you say strategy. And yet still you eat. Because you must. Because refusing food sends a message. Because declining the king's toast invites attention. Because too much caution is just as dangerous as none at all. You take the smallest bite, chew slowly, smile graciously, and survive the meal. Again, later that evening, you sit by the fire, sipping something warm and safe. Your ladies gossip about the feast, who wore what, who drank too much, who tried to impress you with clumsy Latin. You nod, but your thoughts are elsewhere, on the sauce that tasted slightly off. On the way, the steward looked away when you caught his eye. On the way, your cup felt heavier than usual. You tell yourself it was nothing. You hope it was nothing. And you fall asleep that night, not from fullness, but from fatigue. Because staying alive in a castle kitchen takes more than appetite. It takes instinct. It takes memory. It takes the quiet paranoia of a queen who understands every plate is a proposition, and not every bite is innocent. You sit very still, not out of peace, but out of necessity. The artist's brush hovers millimeters from your cheek, and the air smells of egg tempera, old wood, and human patience. This is not your first portrait, and it will not be your last. But each time the process feels the same. Your body becomes an object. Your face becomes a message. You are no longer you. You are a symbol of what you're supposed to be. A perfect queen, not beautiful necessarily. That would be too personal. You must be serene, noble, fruitful looking, unquestionably loyal, just enough softness to suggest mercy, just enough distance to command reverence. The painter already knows which version of you to capture. He has seen you laugh, yes, and once even weep. But on the canvas, none of that belongs. On the canvas, you are still, whole, slightly luminous, an idea. Behind you, a tapestry. In your hand, a book or a flower. On your lap, sometimes a spaniel, sometimes your heir. These are cues, icons, messages. You are not being preserved. You are being performed. And it hurts. Not dramatically, no daggers or disasters. Just the ache of hours spent in a pose that feels more like a punishment than an honor. Your spine stiffens. Your eyes water. Your foot, tucked demurely beneath the gown, goes numb. But you do not move. Because queens do not fidget. You've learned to use pain as stillness. You've learned to breathe shallowly, so your chest won't rise too much, because the bodice must remain perfectly symmetrical. You've learned not to blink too often. They say queens are composed. You say queens are trained. A curious detail in 15th century Florence noblewomen's portraits were painted in profile, not just for elegance, but to conceal imperfections. A slight hook in the nose, an uneven brow, one eye slightly smaller than the other. From the side, you are untouchable, eternal. Even your flaws must be managed. You overhear the painter speaking softly to his apprentice. Soften the jaw, widen the eyes, make the skin more pearl than pink. You are sitting there. You can hear him, but you are not expected to respond. He is not painting your likeness. He is painting your legacy. The portraits are sent to other courts. They hang in halls you may never walk. Sometimes they go in marriage negotiations. How strange to be wooed by your own image. Sometimes they are copied, sometimes altered. There's a famous case of a French queen whose portrait was subtly modified to appear several years younger before being sent to a prospective ally. No one asked her permission. But then whoever does. This leads to a debate among historians. Were portraits empowering for royal women, cementing their presence in the historical record? Or were they another form of control, flattening complex lives into curated images? Some say these paintings gave queens a form of immortality. Others say they offered only illusion. You sit still, pondering this as the painter adds a touch of gold to the edge of your veil. You are supposed to look divine, distant, a little sad perhaps, but only beautifully so. Too much joy suggests frivolity. Too much sorrow implies weakness. The trick is to look like someone who feels, but never too much. And so you hold the exact same expression for hours, and then the days pass. The portrait dries. Eventually, it's unveiled. The courtiers nod. The bishops murmur blessings. Your husband glances and says, "Yes, that will do." The real you steps away, but the painted you stays forever. You come across it years later in a gallery hall. You stop startled. You do not recognize the woman in the frame, not fully. She is calm, still, serene. You remember the headache, the cold feet, the numb hand, the moment the lace collar pricked your throat and you swallowed the urge to cough. None of that is visible. And yet, there she is, a queen, but not a woman. One detail that always stays with you: the portraits never show breath. You never look like you're in motion. You never laugh. You never age. And so, people look at you and say, "She must have been perfect." You want to say, I was exhausted. You want to say, I was hungry. You want to say, I was alive. But they see what they want. And perhaps that is the point. Even now, centuries later, these portraits are studied for signs, clues to lineage health status. Art historians pore over them. They speculate on symbolism. They admire the embroidery. Very few ask how you felt during the sitting. No one asks if you wanted to be remembered this way. And yet, there's a strange kind of power in it too. You may not have chosen the pose, or the colors, or the setting, but you remain. When your voice is gone, and your letters have faded, and your bones rest somewhere in quiet marble, you will still be there, looking out composed, wearing the crown like a question no one knows how to answer. And perhaps that is its own kind of victory. Not in the truth of the image, but in the fact that you cannot be entirely erased, even if they only remember the version they invented. You stand at the edge of the courtyard, at dawn, veil lifted just enough to catch the first breeze, the saddlebags already packed. This is not a journey of exile. Not exactly. It's a pilgrimage. That's what they call it. A holy journey. A devout offering. A queen's righteous retreat to a sacred shrine. But you know the truth. Sometimes a pilgrimage is less about the soul and more about escape. When court becomes a cage too gilded to breathe in, when the whispers grow louder than the music, when your smile begins to stiffen and your voice shrinks into formality, a pilgrimage becomes the one excuse no one questions. Because who would doubt a queen seeking God? You mount the palfrey, with careful grace your ladies behind you, your chaplain beside you, and a respectable entourage in tow, to prove you are neither fleeing nor alone. The people wave. You wave back. It looks like duty. It feels like release, and with every hoofbeat, the walls of the palace fade a little more behind you. In the medieval world, queens frequently took pilgrimages to Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela, Rocamadour, or smaller local shrines with crumbling altars and whispered miracles. Officially, they traveled to pray, to give thanks, to ask for intercession, for fertility, for healing, for peace. Unofficially, some sought distance. Some sought air. Some sought freedom to think without every glance being interpreted. There's a documented case of a queen consort in 14th century Navarre who took a devotional journey just weeks after a political scandal at court. She visited 5 churches donated lavishly and returned with glowing reports of virtue. No one mentioned that the scandal had quietly vanished in her absence. A pilgrimage, it seems, could cleanse more than just the soul. You ride for hours in the open air. No thrones, no painted smiles, just the sound of leather creaking and birds waking with the trees. For the first time in weeks, no one asks you what you intend to wear. One of your ladies laughs. You laugh too. The sound feels strange, untethered from performance. Even your clothes are different now. Simpler, meant for travel. You wear a cloak without embroidery shoes, without heels, and a head covering more about modesty than spectacle. It's almost possible to pretend you're someone else. At the first abbey, you kneel and light a candle. The priest speaks of virtue. The nuns offer prayers. A silver bowl is placed beneath your hands, filled with water said to have touched a saint's bones. You nod. You pray. But mostly, you listen. Because here in the shadows of a stone chapel, women speak more freely. A young sister whispers about the queen who visited years ago and left behind a note tucked in the cloister wall. Another nun hints that the Mother Superior once healed a noblewoman's secret ailment with only prayer and mugwort. You collect these stories like beads. There's one detail from a 13th century English record that stands out. A queen unnamed in the text stayed 2 weeks longer than intended at a rural priory. When her escort was summoned to retrieve her, she claimed she hadn't yet heard God's answer. The court waited. The queen rested. No one dared question the divine. You wonder if she ever wanted to go back. Because there's something about being surrounded only by women who do not bow every time you enter a room, who speak plainly, who laugh when the candle wax drips crooked. It feels like truth. One afternoon, a peasant woman presses a charm into your hand, a braided token of dried clover and red thread. She says it's for safe childbirth. You thank her, tuck it into your satchel, and wonder how many queens before you held the same awkward blessing. As you travel, shrine to shrine, something shifts. Not your title, not your purpose, just your breath. You sleep without silks. You eat without silver. You speak without pausing to weigh every syllable. And yet, you are still queen. That never leaves. It's in the way your ladies ride behind you. In the way the friars announce your name in every village. In the way every altar seems a little brighter when you approach it. But out here away from court, you can remember who you were before they taught you how to be perfect. Not a rebel, not a saint, just a woman in motion. And sometimes you even allow yourself to pray, not for heirs, not for power, not for forgiveness, but simply for stillness. You pray to be allowed a thought that belongs only to you. There's an old debate among scholars. Were pilgrimages sincere acts of devotion, or political retreats cloaked in piety? The answer, as always, is both. Because sometimes the soul needs a destination just to justify the journey. And sometimes the body just needs to move forward. When you finally return to court, they greet you with fanfare, trumpets, banners, a mass in your honor. Your husband asks if you feel cleansed. You nod. You say, very. But what you mean is, I remembered how to breathe. You change back into your courtly robes. You sit beneath your canopy. You resume the expressions they expect, but the quiet lingers inside you like a warm pebble in the palm. No one can see it. No one can take it. You earned it mile by mile prayer, by whispered prayer. And though you may never leave again, not for years, not without permission, you carry a map within you now, not of roads, but of who you were outside the crown. The pins hurt. They always do. Even now, years into queenship, you brace yourself each morning as your hair is twisted wound and stabbed into place by fingers that move quickly and without apology. You sit still, spine straight, as strands are pulled tighter than necessary. One loop, pinned to suggest piety. Another, to hint at fertility. A braid down the back, woven with gold thread, to remind onlookers that you're still desirable, still powerful, but never too powerful. Because royal fashion isn't about comfort. It's about message. And your body, every part of it, is wrapped in layers of language. You step into your gown. It's heavy with embroidery, each stitch loaded with symbolism vines, for growth lions, for courage, lilies, for purity, a falcon embroidered near your heart to suggest loyalty, though you suspect it's really there to warn others how easily you could be made prey. The sleeves trail the floor behind you, requiring a lady's assistance to keep them from dragging. Your shoes are narrow and stiff, not meant for walking, but for being seen while seated. You're not dressed to move. You're dressed to be read. Medieval queens wore their status like armor, and their fashion was their battlefield uniform. Not in the way a knight wears chainmail, but in the way you wear dignity, even when it pinches. One historical detail. Queen Isabeau of Bavaria was known for her elaborate headpieces that resembled horns rising over a foot high in certain portraits. To some, it was fashion. To others, a political statement, unmissable, unforgettable, untouchable. When people look at you, they do not see a woman. They see a banner. Your hair alone carries more significance than a treaty. If it is shown, it signals youth and marital bliss. If veiled, piety. If braided too loosely, scandal. If cut, God forbid, mourning or disgrace. There's a documented case of a queen in Aragon who was accused of impropriety simply because she wore her hair unbound at a feast. No one asked if the hall had been stiflingly hot. No one considered if she was simply tired. Her hair made her suspect, and so you keep yours tightly controlled, even when your scalp aches, even when the comb tugs too hard, even when you want to rip the whole thing down and shake it loose just to feel like a human being again. But you don't, because the queen's appearance is never just hers. It belongs to the realm. Under the gown, corsetry tightens your breath. Rings on every finger weigh down your gestures. Even your scent is curated rose water for softness, ambergris for mystery, clove oil for authority. You no longer ask yourself what you want to wear. You ask what they need to see. And then there are the scars. Not all visible, but all real. A thin line on your wrist from a childhood fall no one ever mentioned again. The faint welt on your ankle from that time you fainted in too tight shoes and struck the marble. The mark on your shoulder from childbirth, where a midwife's urgent grip left bruises that lasted weeks. They hide under velvet, under lace, but they're always there. You learn to view your own body like a fortress, beautiful at a distance, weathered up close. This leads to an academic question, still debated among historians. Did queens control fashion, or did fashion control them? Some argue that royal women wielded clothing as a political tool, using appearance to assert identity, faith, strength. Others contend that queens were trapped in elaborate systems of visual symbolism, with little room for self-expression. You know it's both. You've commissioned gowns not to impress, but to send quiet warnings. You've worn white to express peace and black to signal defiance. You've shown up in jewels so heavy your neck ached for days just to make sure a rival court understood your resilience. There's a peculiar account of a Scandinavian queen who, upon being snubbed at a banquet, changed gowns 3 times in one evening, each more glittering than the last. The king's court took note. By the next morning, the insult had turned into an apology. Fashion is not frivolous. It's a language, and you've become fluent, but sometimes, in the quiet of your chamber, when the attendants are gone and the fire burns low, you unpin your hair yourself. One strand falls, then another. You pull the comb through slowly, not for beauty, just for you. And in that moment, with your head bare and your gown unlaced, you remember what it feels like to be unseen, to be simply a woman, not a figure, not a symbol, not a painting brought to life, just you. No embroidery to explain you, no veil to define you. And it feels strange, liberating, a little dangerous. You curl into bed, with only a shift your scars resting beside you like old friends. They do not need to be covered. They need only be carried. And in the dark, you wonder if the world will ever see you, not as the queen they need, but as the woman who wore the crown with grace and the bruises with quiet pride. The chapel is cool and still. Light filters in through narrow stained glass, turning the air into soft mosaics that shift with the wind. You sit at the edge of a carved bench, hands folded veil drawn forward just enough to cast your eyes in shadow. No one watches you here, or if they do, they pretend not to, because this space, this silence, this air that smells faintly of wax and cedar, this is the only place where you can say things aloud. The confessional is small, unadorned, just wood worn smooth by generations of secret-bearing hands. On one side, a priest. On the other, you. You're not supposed to speak of politics, of court, of anything beyond the state of your soul. But then again, everything is the state of your soul. You confess slowly, carefully. You choose your words with the precision of someone who knows that even mercy has ears. I have thought unkindly of my husband. I have felt pride. I have resented the crown I wear. These are safe, vague, harmless, but underneath the rehearsed lines are truths too sharp to say directly. I have loved someone who was not mine. I have dreamed of running. I have wished for silence so long I feared I had swallowed my voice. The priest doesn't see your face, but he hears the hesitation in your breath. And sometimes, just sometimes, you sense that he understands more than he says, because he has heard these things before. Confession was one of the few spaces in the medieval world where even queens were humbled not by their rank, but by their own secrets. And sometimes, it was the only space where women of power were allowed to speak plainly. One recorded confession from a 15th century French queen includes the phrase, "My body is obedient, but my mind wanders. God forgive me." We don't know what she meant, but you do. In a world where every public word must be pleasing, where every gesture is measured, the confessional becomes something dangerously close to freedom. But it's still not safe, because not all confessors are quiet. Not all priests are neutral. Some serve God, and others serve the crown. There are stories of queens whose confessions were whispered into the wrong ears, of penances repeated back at court, of private shame turned into public vulnerability. It's a fragile thing, trusting someone whose vow is silence, but whose robes still bend toward power, and yet you return. Week after week, holy day after holy day, you kneel, you speak, you unburden, because there's nowhere else to put it. You cannot cry in front of your ladies. You cannot rage in front of the king. You cannot admit, even to yourself, that you are sometimes tired of being obedient, noble, perfect. But in that wooden box behind the lattice screen, your voice shakes, and no one corrects you. The confessor murmurs absolution. You recite the prayers, and when you rise, you feel no lighter, but at least no one can accuse you of not trying. A peculiar tradition in some courts, queens were expected to confess more often than kings, to remain pure in conscience as well as in appearance. It was believed that a woman's virtue upheld the moral tone of the entire realm. That's a lovely way of saying you're responsible for everyone's soul, but no one is responsible for yours. There's a debate among theologians and scholars even now. Did confession serve to liberate medieval women, Or did it reinforce their submission? Was it a release or a reinforcement of control? You suspect it was both, because even as you speak your sins aloud, you are reminded that someone else is listening, that forgiveness must be granted by another, that your conscience is not entirely your own. And yet there's power in naming something. When you say, "I am afraid," you are no longer just afraid. You are a person who knows her fear, who can hold it, fold it, hide it, even if you still must walk into the banquet hall and smile like nothing is wrong. There is one memory you return to again and again. It was a winter morning before dawn. Snow muffled the court like a blessing. You slipped away early, your cloak heavy and wet with frost, and entered the chapel alone. There was no priest yet, just the dark, just the silence. And in that silence, for the first time, you didn't whisper your confession. You said nothing. You simply sat in the stillness and let yourself be. Not queen, not wife, not mother, not subject. Just you, not judged, not observed, not even forgiven. Just existing. And that perhaps was the holiest moment of all. The windows don't open. Not really. They tilt just enough to suggest air, but the thick lattice blocks your hand, your breath, your escape. You pace slowly, counting steps between the wall and the hearth. 12. Always 12. The same since you were brought here. They call it retirement or spiritual reflection. Some even dare to say it's for your own safety. But let's name it plainly. This is a gilded prison. You are still a queen, technically. Your name is still embroidered on court documents, though you no longer write them. You're still painted into family trees, though the branches have grown past you. Your gowns have been taken in, your jewels locked away. The mirror above your basin is gone entirely. You're meant to forget who you were, but queens don't forget. You remember the day it started, the whispered talks behind doors, the official tone of a clerk reading your retreat into religious life, the way the king didn't meet your eyes when he signed the decree. He didn't need to explain. Queens who were too political, too visible, too beloved, or simply too inconvenient were often moved aside under the guise of virtue. Historically, many royal women were sent to convents or remote castles under the claim of illness rest or religious calling. The truth was often far more political. Take Queen Joanna of Naples, accused of madness, or Eleanor of Aquitaine, kept under house arrest by her own husband for over a decade, not for crimes, for power. Your own power was never obvious. You didn't lead armies. You didn't defy the Pope. Your crime was more subtle. You had influence. You were liked. You were listened to. And that, in a world of uneasy kings, was dangerous. So now you sit in a chamber lined with old prayer books and embroidery hoops. You are encouraged to sew, to pray, to reflect. And you do. But not in the way they want. You don't stitch lilies or saints. You stitch maps, imaginary ones, hidden islands, forests with no paths, cities where queens are not tucked away like secrets. And you don't pray aloud. Instead, you whisper your own name again and again to remember how it sounds. Because even a crown can rust. And when it does, it tightens. There is a strange detail in the chronicles of a 14th century Castilian queen once confined. She began writing letters to herself, signing them, Her Grace of the Forgotten Room. Historians don't know what happened to her. Most records simply stop. But you can imagine. You know that kind of silence. The academic debate persists. Were such confinements acts of mercy protecting queens from scandal or methods of quiet punishment? Modern historians lean toward the latter, but the past doesn't speak in absolutes. Some queens thrived in isolation, rebuilt themselves, reclaimed identity through scholarship writing or influence over local communities. Others faded. You intend not to fade. Each day, you walk the 12 steps. Each night, you stare at the sky through the lattice, whispering the names of stars as though they are old friends. You still receive visitors on occasion, always supervised, always short. Your sister once came. She brought figs wrapped in linen and a ribbon that smelled faintly of orange peel. You hid the ribbon in your sleeve. You sleep with it near your heart. It reminds you that the world is still out there, that you are still in it. And one day, perhaps not soon, perhaps never, you might walk back into it, not as the queen they remember, but as the woman they underestimated, because you are still watching, still learning, still thinking, even in this quiet place, especially in this quiet place. They took your throne. They did not take your voice. And when you speak again, if you choose to, they will listen. Because silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is preparation. It begins, as it always does, with a whisper, a servant's glance, a folded message tucked into your sewing basket. You're not supposed to be paying attention, but of course you are. Because while the council meets in the great hall, while men squabble over taxes and borders and grain supplies, you're seated behind a velvet curtain, fingers threaded with embroidery, silk eyes focused on the stitching, but ears wide open. It's easy to mistake quiet for absence. Easier still to think power must raise its voice to be real. But here you are, queen in all but name-guiding kingdoms, with a lifted brow, a knowing pause, a well-timed suggestion murmured during a supper walk or whispered just before prayer. You're not alone in this. History is full of women like you. Queens who ruled not from thrones, but from thresholds. Some called it influence, others interference, and some quite plainly manipulation. But it was power, make no mistake. Eleanor of Aquitaine navigated politics through her children, her court, her charm. Margaret of Anjou orchestrated strategy during the Wars of the Roses from behind symbolic veils of widowhood and grace. And Isabella of France, well, she didn't just whisper. She eventually shouted. But only after years of courtly listening. The thing is, you learn to move through rooms like a shadow. You become fluent in the language of glances. You know which knight drinks too deeply, which noble owes a favor, which bishop finds it hard to say no to you, not because of desire, but because you once nursed his sister during plague season. They say queens have no armies, but you have memories, relationships, names. You hold dinner parties where alliances are forged over almond tarts. You commission tapestries that place certain family members just a little closer to royal arms than tradition requires. You recommend tutors, and in doing so, you shape minds. One academic theory suggests that women of court were the first masters of soft governance, that where men drew swords, women pulled strings, not because they were weaker, but because pulling strings was the only tool allowed. In fact, some medieval etiquette books warned men not to allow too much speaking with women of the palace for fear they would turn the house like dough in hand. That's rather flattering, isn't it? You remember one winter when the harvest failed and the Treasury Guard recommended reducing grain allotments to servants. It was efficient, he said. You invited him to supper, spoke kindly, asked if he'd ever seen a child faint from hunger, suggested perhaps instead he cut 2 ceremonial feasts. The next day, the ledger was changed. He never spoke of that conversation again. That's the kind of victory queens behind curtains earn. No trumpets, no declarations, just policies that quietly change. You've learned that real power often lies in questions. Have you considered, would it be unwise to wait? Should we perhaps pray on this first? You offer options that feel like their idea. It takes time, but you're patient. There's a peculiar entry in a Venetian court diary where a nobleman writes, "The queen does not rule, but the king does not decide until she nods." That makes you smile. There is a game being played, yes, but the game board is always shifting, and your hand is steadier than theirs. Still, this quiet power has its cost. There are days you wonder what it might be like to speak plainly, to stand at the front of the court, unfettered by propriety or expectation, to say, "Here is the plan. Here is my voice." Listen to it, not because it is soft, but because it is right. But you know the cost of that too. For every queen who speaks too soon, there's a tower, a trial, a tomb. So you pace yourself. Let them underestimate you. Let them believe the curtain is there for decoration. Because behind it, you are building a kingdom, not of land, of people, of loyalties, of quiet legacies no one can erase. And one day, perhaps when the stories are written, a careful historian might pause over your name, might notice how decisions shifted when you entered the record, might suspect that power doesn't always come wearing armor. Sometimes it comes in velvet, with a knowing smile. You've always known that your body was never really yours. Not entirely. It's talked about in formal tones behind tapestries and in side chambers in hushed Latin phrases that sound so official they almost disguise the truth your womb is a matter of state. Your belly isn't just watched, it's waited on. A mist moon stirs courtiers into action. A faint appetite draws sudden interest. You sneeze, and someone calls for the physician. You faint, and the kingdom holds its breath. Because you're not just a queen, you're a vessel, a hope, a fragile promise wrapped in flesh and velvet. And if a child does come, you'll hear them whisper it again. The line is safe. Royal motherhood isn't tender lullabies or quiet cradles. It's duty diplomacy and dangerous mathematics. 1 child is a triumph. 2 are insurance. 3, that's a dynasty. But failure. Failure has 1,000 names, none of them kind. Barrenness, barren mare, cold womb, God's punishment, witchcraft. Even if the king never touches you, you will bear the blame. You know the stories. Queens replaced, set aside, pushed into nunneries. Anne of Bohemia, Catherine of Aragon, and so many more who never made it into ballads or portraits. In public, the pressure is wrapped in ceremony. People kneel to you, offer honey and rosemary, praise your glow. In private, it's relentless. Midwives inspecting linens, ladies in waiting reporting what you ate, what you didn't, when you rested, how you sat. The strangest part is how mechanical it becomes. There are even medieval manuals written by male physicians, of course describing how queens should lie with their legs raised or eat pigeon hearts boiled in milk or avoid moonlight altogether. Yes, moonlight. Apparently, it cooleth the womb. You smile at that? A tight, private smile. Because if moonlight had the power to undo kingdoms, you'd bathe in it every night. There's one peculiar tale. From a 13th century German chronicle, a queen is said to have carried a stone in her pocket, believing it would help her conceive. The stone was later passed down as a relic. Not the baby, the stone. And still, the court waited. You wait too. But the weight is heavier than most can imagine. Every pang could be a beginning, or an ending. And if a child does come, it doesn't end the scrutiny. It multiplies. Because now, it's about which child. A girl. A polite disappointment wrapped in silk. A reason to try again. A boy. Celebration. Bells. Feasts. And then fear. Because infant mortality is high. You don't knit baby booties. You prepare mourning gowns just in case. Sometimes, when you cradle your child at night, you feel the kingdom resting in your arms. Not metaphorically, literally. Because this little body represents lands, laws, and futures. And should anything happen, anything at all, you know where blame will fall. Still, you love them. Fiercely. Quietly. You sing lullabies your mother sang. Press warm cloths to feverish brows. Pray in silence. Bargain with saints. Not for glory. Not for legacy. But because beneath all the politics, all the prophecy, all the pressure, you are still human. Still mother. And love, real love, lives somewhere between the titles. But it's lonely sometimes. No one asks how you feel. They ask if you've quickened, if you've bled, if you've birthed. And in all the records, your role is reduced to a line: she bore him 2 sons and a daughter. As though that were all. As though you were nothing but a cradle and a crown. One academic debate still simmers among historians: were royal women truly powerless in motherhood? Or did they use childbirth as a way to gain favor, leverage, even policy influence? It's likely both. Some queens used their fertility as a weapon. Others were weaponized by it. You know that balance intimately. Some days, you wield the promise of heirs like a scepter. Other days, you feel like little more than a pawn moved 2 spaces forward. And yet, there's a quiet rebellion in surviving this. In continuing. In loving. In protecting. Even when the court forgets your name. Even when history shortens your life to a statistic. Even when all they remember is whether your child wore a crown. You know better. You were the crown's cradle, but also its shield. And that matters. The mirror in your chamber is polished bronze, not silver. It doesn't reflect perfectly, but it reflects persistently. And every morning, you stare into it, not just to see yourself, but to see who they expect you to be. Your face is not just a face. It's diplomacy. It's a battleground. Because royal beauty, you've come to learn, is less about allure and more about control. A queen's appearance is a political matter. If your cheeks are pale, rumors of illness stir. If they flush, whispers of scandal follow. A stray gray hair might mean stress, unrest, and aging dynasty. Your body is not a body. It's a canvas upon which the state paints its hopes, fears, and standards. There's a peculiar rule at court that no one says aloud: you must be lovely, but not vain. Attractive, but never aware of it. Too plain, and you are scorned. Too beautiful, and you are feared. So you aim for balance. You learn to darken your lashes with ash, to rub your cheeks with crushed rose petals, to bite your lips gently before entering a room so they seem freshened. You pluck your eyebrows into high-arching moons, a fashion that says innocence from across a ballroom, and your hair blonde is preferred. If you weren't born with it, there are rinses of saffron and chamomile drying your scalp, but gilding your strands just enough to pass inspection. A scholar once described the court as a gilded cage where women's faces were the bars. It feels apt, because here's the strange truth. You're always being looked at, but rarely seen. Even the shape of your waist is discussed at council tables. Whether you wear stays or tight-laced gowns, whether your silhouette is pleasing enough to maintain public affection, these things are weighed like currency. And it's not just the men watching. Other women watch too. Some with sympathy, some with rivalry, some just to survive. There's a curious detail. In a 14th century French etiquette manual, royal women were advised never to laugh too loudly, lest they loosen their beauty. Yes, laughter was considered dangerous to elegance. So you smile with your mouth closed. Practice soft mirth. Tame your gestures, and you walk always with grace. Because a single stumble, a torn hem, a drooping sleeve, and suddenly the court sees a crumbling crown. But what they don't see is the effort beneath it, the discomfort of jeweled collars that dig into your collarbone, the ache in your ribs from corsets pulled too tightly by overeager ladies-in-waiting, the headache from perfumed oils massaged into your scalp to fight lice while maintaining your scent. You're meant to look effortless, but effort is all it is. One English queen reportedly spent 3 hours each morning preparing her public face, not because she enjoyed it, but because anything less risked criticism in foreign letters. Even during childbirth, you're not free from the gaze. Witnesses are called to ensure the air is of the body. Paint is touched up on your face before you're shown with the baby. You are a symbol, first a woman, second. And yet, there's a quiet resistance in the mirror. You begin to learn what parts of you they cannot polish away. The crease between your brows where doubt lives. The small scar near your ear from childhood climbing trees before you were betrothed. The fire in your eyes when someone suggests you smile more. You find ways to bend the rules. You select gowns with colors that flatter you, not just the court. You commission portraits where your gaze meets the viewer's rather than looking down demurely. You train your daughters to walk with their chins high, not out of arrogance, but defiance. Some academic debates linger, even now, were beauty standards imposed to weaken women's political agency? Or were they tools women repurposed for their own power? You suspect it's both. You've used your looks as a shield and as a sword. You've worn the silken chains with poise, and sometimes you've wrapped them around others' wrists when needed. But it doesn't make them less heavy. Still, every morning you return to the mirror. You paint pluck braid and breathe. And you remind yourself, this too is armor. Not forged in fire, but in expectation. Not worn into battle, but into banquets, baptisms, and bureaucratic dinners. This is the war of beauty. And while it may not draw blood, it draws something deeper, the endless effort to exist while being seen through someone else's lens. But in the moments before bed, when the pins come out, when the rouge is wiped clean, when the wig is placed gently back on its stand, you look at your reflection and know the truth. You are more than the silken chains. You always were. The wardrobe is not just a room. It's a kingdom within a kingdom. Inside it, every fold of silk, every stitch of velvet, every gold-threaded hem is part of a language you've had to learn fluently. Because clothing for you is never just about warmth or beauty. It's about message alliance, lineage, suspicion, and spectacle. They say a queen's garments speak before she does. And in your case, that's not a metaphor, it's a strategy. A certain shade of blue might whisper loyalty to the Virgin Mary. A pattern of lions across your cloak might signal allegiance to England. A French-cut sleeve, a diplomatic nod, or a political misstep, depending on who's watching. And everyone is watching. You remember your first robe of state. It was heavier than you expected. Not just in fabric, though it weighed enough to need 2 maids to arrange it, but in symbolism. The ermine lining meant purity. The gold stitching meant expense. The high collar meant you weren't expected to move much, just be admired. The irony is the more elaborate the dress, the more still you're meant to be. But here's what they don't tell you. The royal wardrobe is also a map of fear. Too much silk from Italy, and they'll say, you favor the Pope. Too little ornamentation, and they'll whisper of financial trouble. Wear black, and it's mourning. Wear red, and it's seduction. Even your underlayers are political. Yes, your chemise, that unseen linen closest to your skin, is expected to be embroidered just finely enough to show that you respect courtly standards. But not too finely, or else it's vanity. You live between enough and too much. There's one peculiar historical detail you think about, often Eleanor of Castile. Queen of England supposedly owned over 300 gowns at the time of her death. The archives list them by color origin, even number of buttons, but not by comfort. No one ever asked how they felt to wear. And some were downright painful. You've stood in front of your mirror, with stiff sleeves pinching your elbows, necklines so tight you had to sip water sideways, shoes dyed with lead-based pigment that made your toes ache. But the show must go on. Even the act of dressing becomes a ritual. Ladies-in-waiting pass layers between them in silence. Linen wool, silk fur, each added like a whisper. They button and lace and tug and smooth. You stand still, a statue becoming legend. Then comes the jewelry, rings for lineage, brooches for diplomacy, a girdle belt heavy with gold links spelling out family crests, and the crown, only on state days, but always there in the imagination of others. It's not just for looking, it's for proving, because if a noble family doubts your legitimacy, they'll find the proof in the fabric. If a foreign envoy visits, he'll judge your influence by the hem of your sleeve. If your husband is considering another alliance, he'll weigh your worth by how your wardrobe dazzles the court. Academic debates still flutter around. This were queens truly trapped in these garments? Or did they use clothing to assert their agency? Did embroidery and excess restrict them or empower them? You've felt both. You've chosen your attire carefully for banquets where the stakes were high, and you've had your favorites taken from you when politics shifted. Cloth can be torn. So can loyalty. And what about the women who dressed you? They're not just background figures. They're witnesses, spies sometimes, allies if you're lucky. One loose thread, one whispered observation about a birthmark, a bruise, a pregnancy. These things move faster than rumors. That's why you learn to control the dressing room, like a queen commands a battlefield. You learn to pause just long enough when a certain necklace is presented. You learn which slippers mean you're in a negotiating mood. A velvet cloak isn't just warmth, it's a wall. You remember once being sewn into a gown for a coronation. Literally sewn. The bodice laced so tightly it couldn't be opened again without scissors. You were told it was to ensure the line of the dress didn't break. You thought the line of the dress, like the line of succession, always protected. even at your expense. And still you smiled. You walked with tiny steps across floors so cold your toes went numb. You accepted compliments with a nod. You twirled slowly as if your body weren't aching beneath the brocade. Because that's what queens do. Even in layers, even under scrutiny, you wonder what it would feel like to wear plain wool again, to lace your own gown, to choose your color based on mood, not strategy. But you know that would mean stepping out of the story. And you've been written into it too deeply now. When you're older, if you make it that far, you'll pass your dresses on to daughters, nieces, noble brides-to-be. Each hemline a lesson, each faded thread a memory. Because royal garments don't just adorn, they archive. And if anyone ever truly studies the seams, they might find your story stitched between the gold. Quiet, heavy, enduring, like you. There comes a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when a queen begins to vanish. Not literally, of course. You're still there, still attending ceremonies, still lacing up gowns that weigh more than your secrets. But the attention starts to drift. The portraits stop being updated. The scribes stop quoting your speeches. The spotlight that once clung to your every move now cools, and you begin to slip into the margins. You're not forgotten. Not yet. But you're fading. It begins with your title. The queen becomes the dowager, or her grace, or simply her. A pronoun instead of a name. And it's strange, because you've spent so long becoming this idea, this beacon of elegance, strategy, lineage, and loyalty. You've stood in the storm of politics. You've worn the veils of diplomacy. You've raised heirs and swallowed suspicions and smiled at ambassadors whose hands smelled like ink and blood. You did everything they asked, sometimes more. But queens, it seems, don't get farewells. They get erasure. You begin to notice it in the way letters are addressed. No more golden seals. No more poetic flourishes. You are included only when necessary, and sometimes not at all. Your voice, once consulted on treaties, is now asked only for prayers. And then the truly strange part, they start to speak about you in the past tense, even while you're still alive. She was such a presence. She used to have such influence. Do you remember how she used to carry herself? You want to scream, I am still here. But queens don't scream. They adjust. So you do what royal women have always done. You adapt to invisibility. And that, too, is a form of survival. You retreat to your rooms, yes, but not in defeat. In strategy. You surround yourself with tapestries and memories. You reread the letters you were once too busy to answer. You stitch small symbols into your handkerchiefs, not for show, but for self. A lion for strength. A lily for dignity. A star for the future. You walk the garden paths slower now, but you walk them. You let the sunlight fall on your skin and remind you that you are not just a relic in a dusty chapel. You are still a story in motion. There's a historical oddity that always makes you smile. Some royal widows in the 14th century took up gardening not as a hobby, but as a quiet assertion of power. They cultivated rare herbs. They oversaw entire orchards. One queen was rumored to breed roses that only opened at midnight. People called it eccentric, but maybe it was resistance. Maybe it was legacy, because even when queens vanish from the scrolls, they leave fingerprints in the soil, echoes in the corridors, and secrets in the fabric of the state. Some historians argue that royal women, only mattered as long as they were fertile, visible, politically useful. But others say their true influence began once the noise faded, when they could act without watching eyes build, without male approval, mentor without threat. You like that second version. You start to gather the young women of the court. Daughters, nieces, ladies in waiting. You teach them the things no tutor includes. How to smile with your eyes, not your teeth. How to wear a veil like a shield. How to write a letter that says one thing and means another. You become a myth in your own lifetime. And perhaps, strangely, that's a kind of freedom. You realize that you're no longer being used to decorate someone else's ambition. You can finally quietly pursue your own. You commission a private chapel, not grand, but intimate. You select the saints depicted in the windows. One holds a sword. One holds a quill. One holds nothing at all, because she needs nothing. And when the time comes, when your name is etched into stone, and the court begins planning the public mourning, you wonder what they'll remember. The dresses, the children, the alliances you helped forge. Maybe, but perhaps somewhere in a small corner of the archives, a page will curl slightly from the air, and someone will read the margin notes you once scrawled beside a treaty draft. Or a young woman will stand in the orchard you planted and bite into a plum you grafted yourself. And they'll say, she was not just a queen. She was a woman who wanted more. Not more power, not more jewels, more truth, more silence that belonged to her alone, more space to remember who she was before the titles, before the masks. Because that's the final thing they never tell you about queenship. The crown is not what makes you powerful. It's what you do when no one's looking that does. And in this final chapter, when the audience is gone, when the court has moved on, when your name no longer echoes in the grand halls, you are finally beautifully just yourself. And that might be the greatest power of all. So here we are, at the quiet edge of the story, the final page, the last candle flickering on the windowsill of a long-forgotten castle. You've walked beside women who were never meant to be remembered, yet somehow still linger in whispers, in silk threads, in the hush behind every grand tale of kings. You've stood in royal chambers, where power was soft-spoken, where longing was layered beneath veils, and where strength wore perfume and a practiced smile. You've watched queens rise with poise and fall with grace sometimes, without anyone noticing they ever reigned at all. And still they mattered, because history may not have carved their names in stone with fairness, but you felt them tonight in the spaces between facts, in the corners of silence, not as perfect heroines, not as tragic footnotes, but as women navigating a world that asked them to be everything and allowed them to be almost nothing. You've listened well. You've let them speak. And now the night has deepened. The palace is quiet again. The gowns have been folded. The footsteps have faded. Only the hush remains. So let go of the weight of crowns and courts. Drift away as they did, gently, quietly, without need for permission. That's the story. For tonight may your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.